Hello everyone, my name is Paul Santana, and I would like to apologize in advance for the video quality, or the sound quality. It may not be the best, and also apologize if you hear any background sounds. Alright, so let's get started. I decided to base my research project on people's views on sex education in public schools. I chose this topic because I believe it is an important subject that must continue to be taught in public schools, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. We all know sex education is an important topic for people of all ages, but mostly for the younger generation, such as teenagers in high school and young adults in college. When it comes to sex education, there are different approaches to teaching it. The two most familiar approaches are abstinence-only and comprehensive information-based. However, policymakers in the United States find it difficult to decide which approach is more beneficial, which is also why different states use different ways of instructing the subject. Therefore, there's not one way sex education is taught. All schools do not use the same method as others, and the same can be said for all states. Everyone uses different approaches depending on their policies and regulations for going about it. Why is it difficult to decide which approach to use for teaching sex education? Some things need to be taken into consideration, such as people's views on the subject. The concept is constantly changing, as well as self-gender identification. What I mean by this is people's ways of expressing themselves. For example, many people may consider themselves as straight, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Let's not forget about the different movements, such as the LGBT movement, feminism, the civil rights movement, and let's not forget about religion. My point is, everyone will have a different view on sex education and will not always agree with the way it is taught. Throughout this course, we were given the opportunity to research a topic based on using a variety of statistical methods used in social sciences, such as SPSS and GSS. We were able to create a research and null hypothesis, understand statistical significance, use different tests to test the level of significance between two different variables, apply 5 steps of hypothesis testing to test the null hypothesis, and provide a conclusion on whether we were able to reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. I decided to research people's views on sex education in public schools, as mentioned earlier. In order to achieve this goal, I have investigated whether people's views on sex education in public schools differs by gender, and how that affects the argument on whether schools should allow sex education in the public schools. I decided to use 2 quantitative studies in order to explain the significance of my research further. The main purpose of the first study was to investigate parents' opinions on public schools incorporating sex education in the curriculum. It was also to investigate parents' opinions on schools incorporating strategies to prevent teenage pregnancy based on different factors. According to the findings, after using the comparison results from using a chi-square test, 86% of parents who lived in high-risk areas where teen pregnancy was significant were more likely to accept the idea of sex education being taught in schools than those parents that lived in the general community, which is about 80% approximately. Nonetheless, both geographical areas were for sex education being taught in public schools. The purpose of the second study was to examine further why topics such as birth control and how to access STD and contraceptive services are being taught less over abstinence and information based on HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases. However, based on the findings, sex education teachers in the South, approximately 30%, believed teaching abstinence was the only way to reduce STDs and pregnancy, as opposed to the Northeast, which was about 17%. Nonetheless, according to the study, it is believed that all U.S. high schools should include information on condoms as well as other contraceptives. Data on sex education and people's views on the concept were retrieved from the General Social Survey, also known as GSS, for the year of 2012. GSS serves an important role in studying American public opinion and values since 1972 in order to identify and explain certain trends in attitudes and behaviors and comparing those results to other societies throughout the world. However, The National Opinion Research Center, also known as NORC, at the University of Chicago is considered a nonprofit organization known for conducting studies over several decades. Nonetheless, its use of the GSS has been recognized as one of the most beneficial social science research organizations throughout the world, despite it being one of the oldest ever used. During the study, variables and data have been collected using the 2012 GSS and the Statistical Package for the Social Sciences, also known as SPSS, program. There was approximately 1,974 adults that have been surveyed during that year between the ages of 18 and older in the United States via face-to-face interviews. Furthermore, the National Science Foundation also funded the research. The independent variable that was used throughout this project was sex, which helped me identify the sex of the respondent and to see if gender was a significant factor in allowing or disallowing sex education to be taught in public schools. The dependent variable that was used was sex educ, which was used to identify how many people were for and against sex education. This is the data from both variables provided by SPSS. The one on the left is the independent variable, which is table 1, and the one on the right is the dependent variable, which is table 2. According to the independent variable for sex, which stands for respondent sex, it has a valid percent of 44.9% of males and 55.1% for females. According to the frequency, there are 886 males and 1,088 females that participated in the sample. There was a total of 1,974 respondents. For the dependent variable sex educ, which stands for sex education in public schools, it has a valid percent of 90.8% of people who were for sex education in public schools. There's also a valid percent of 9.2% of people who were against it. As for the frequency, there was 1,157 people who were in favor for sex education. In contrast, there was 117 people who were against it. As a result, according to the data from SPSS, more people were in favor for sex education in public schools compared to those who were not. Therefore, more people liked the idea. This is a cross-tabulation for both variables. In reading across the first row in Table 5, we see that women, 92.3%, are more likely than men, 89%, to be in favor for sex education. And reading across the second row, we see that women, 7.7%, are less likely than men, 11%, to oppose for sex education. The bottom right cell on the table is where we can find that there was a total of 1,274 people answer this question as a sample. Overall, I can say that women would most likely approve the idea of allowing sex education in public schools over men. On the other hand, men would most likely oppose for sex education in public schools than women would, according to the statistics. By using the 10% point rule between these two variables, I get a percentage difference of 3.3% for the first and second rows, which means the relationship between these two variables is not worth examining further. Furthermore, we can reject the null hypothesis, given the statistics, meaning that females are more likely to be in favor for sex education in public schools over men. Throughout this research, a chi-square test of significance has been applied in order to estimate the likelihood that a relationship between the independent variable and dependent variables actually exists in the United States and whether the study supports the hypothesis. However, a chi-square test was necessary given the independent variable sex is a dichotomous nominal variable and the dependent variable sex educ is nominal. Nonetheless, a 5-step process for testing the hypothesis using SPSS has been conducted. Now you can see here my research question was, what are people's views on sex education in public schools? For my hypothesis, if you are a female, then you are more likely to be in favor for sex education in public schools. For my null hypothesis, gender will have no effect on whether or not sex education should be allowed in public schools. Moreover, the level of significance was set at 0.05. Now, according to the output in Table 6, we can see that P equals 0.042. Since P is less than 0.05, I can reject the null hypothesis, meaning that females are more likely to be in favor for sex education in public schools. Since the independent variable is a dichotomous nominal variable and consists of a 2x2 table, we must use a phi level or pi level measurement in order to calculate the output. As a result, given the value of pi being negative 0.057, we can conclude that knowing people's opinions and whether sex education should be taught in public schools, it will reduce our error in predicting the sex of the respondent by negative 5.7%. Therefore, the relationship between both variables sex and sex is an uninteresting association since the value falls under the positive or negative 0.01 to 0.09 measure of association, according to Table 8, which, according to this guideline, the strength is considered weak as well. So altogether, throughout this research, a study was developed based on the question, what are people's views on sex education in public schools? I decided to study the topic due to the amount of controversy related to sex education and the lack of a solid foundation being available in public schools as far as how sex education should be instructed throughout the United States. However, when running the cross-tabulation between the independent variable and the dependent variable, I found that females are more likely to be in favor for sex education over men. In addition, when testing the hypothesis using a chi-square test, I was able to reject the null hypothesis, meaning that females are more likely to be in favor for sex education in public schools. However, although the null hypothesis can be rejected, it does not necessarily prove the hypothesis either, due to several other underlying factors that can affect the argument of whether sex education should be implemented in public schools. Further experimentation and research needs to occur in order to examine the concept further. By running a measures of association test using pi, I noticed that correlation between both of my variables was weak when comparing the results to the strength of association guideline. Additionally, my analysis adds evidence that people in the United States tend to be in favor for implementing sex education in the public schools. The studies included also provided evidence that using abstinence-only education will not necessarily reduce teen pregnancies and STDs. Rather, schools in the United States that add comprehensive sex education along with abstinence concepts will. So there you have it, guys. Sex education is important and should continue to be taught in public schools regardless of gender. So why is sex education important to be implemented in the school curriculum? Well, first of all, it will help teens and young adults become more prepared and aware of the possible consequences of unprotected sex. Alright everyone, that is all for now. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and everyone have a wonderful day.